Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you for joining us today. You're listening to Answers from the Universe. I'm your host, Jessica Ariel Morocco, and wow, we have a wonderful day out here in Massachusetts. It's starting to get warm. The snow's beginning to melt. It has been incredible, and also it has affected a lot of our audio connection. So please bear with us. We've had quite a few challenges the past couple of weeks, but I'm sure things are going to get better. Very hopeful. So anyhow, I have the most wonderful guest, Simon Parkes, and he was recently on JP's show, and they had an interesting discussion. A lot about information that I frequently talk about anyhow. What the thing that's really struck me about Simon is as soon as I saw he was in an interview discussing super soldiers and some other possibilities of that people can't quite wrap their head around. It sounds very sci-fi to a lot of people. But I think that it's quite interesting, and I just kept on watching one video after another, and Simon just seems very, very honest, straightforward, highly informative, and willing to just, share information that he really didn't have to share, but to help others to understand and have a better perspective of things that are going on in the other dimensional space. So without further delay, I'd like to bring on Simon Parkes.
Hi, Jessica. It's lovely to speak to you, and lovely to speak to your audience as well.
Well, thank you. And I know that you've told your story quite a bit, and you have a fascinating story, starting with your early childhood and some of the things that you experienced. I also had some interesting things happen to me as well, such as, seeing, having lucid dreams and experiences with spacecrafts over my home and some other types of activities of that nature. So I also had beings come and visit me too, and they're different, and so people don't fully understand this information. I think we have a common thread. So what I want you to do is maybe share with people some things that maybe you haven't been able or free to discuss because of the time that you have or don't have to go into these topics, but I really want to leave it up to you to talk about things that you think are important. And I also know that you also talk about the jinn, which is something that a lot of people don't know how to discuss. I do a lot of paranormal investigations. Okay. So it sounds like I'm rambling here, but I'm just trying to give you some freedom to express and talk about whatever you want to say.
Well, that's fine, Jessica. It's fine. I tend to just go with what the host wants, or if there's interaction with the audience, sometimes from a chat room, or they text or email their questions in. So I'm just fairly flexible, really. But if you don't have a structure, then I'm happy just to lead with it, and maybe then you can, take out those questions and develop the bits that interest you. You mentioned the jinn.
Mm-hmm.
I did a presentation a whiles back now, because there was just a vacuum in the topic. Very, very few people were even talking about the subject. And those people that were talking about it, they were well-meaning, but they didn't really have any experience of the jinn. They were usually looking at old texts or old writings, or perhaps interviewing people, and they didn't really have the full story. So I did a presentation on that, and that really did get a lot of feedback. Plenty of people from the Muslim world actually contacted to talk about the Quran and the jinn side of it. So, yeah, it's what I've tried to do, I guess, is I've looked where there have been gaps in people's knowledge or people prepared to talk about it, and just tried to start some sort of conversation going.
Well, I think that's a good topic because, like I said, I do paranormal investigations with friends on occasion. They ask me to come in because I'm a psychic intuitive medium. I can, see whatever's going on in the space, and sometimes it's, just spirits that had passed over. They still remain in space, but on occasion, it's very rare. It doesn't happen often where you have a very, very powerful being there, and they have different names for it. Some refer to them as demons, but there are powers. I mean, they're definitely above the level of human power, and I was just curious if you can kind of expound on that. I know that you have your video, which I would highly recommend people reviewing it. That was very, very informative, and going back to the time of Solomon and the agreements with, was it Asmodeus? So maybe you can take it from there.
Well, yeah, okay. There's a big misconception about the jinn. I quite like the word demon. To me, being a demon doesn't mean something bad. Mm-hmm. It's not the fact that something's demonic that's bad. It's the agreements that are made, or the magician that calls them forward, and the deals they do. And it's bad if that energy is going to be used to hurt somebody else or afflict somebody else. Then that's bad magic. That's bad. But the demon in itself isn't bad. In terms of Solomon, the Bible is Old Testament has been somewhat altered, and some original texts were removed by the Catholic Church, who didn't want some of the elements to come out. But in short, we are taught that King Solomon commanded a jinn, and he used the jinn to help him build his temple. Of course, this is where the Knights Templars come from. That's why they call themselves the Knights Templars, after King Solomon's temple, where all the treasures were hidden. And treasures not as in gold and silver, but as in exotic technologies or equipment. The thing is that in the Western world, and that's everything sort of west of Turkey, we have learnt to forget. We've learnt to forget that there are other things in our world that we share with, and it's been changed out of our religion or out of our folklore. Whereas if you go to the east, to those countries sort of east of Turkey, then the idea of a demon or a jinn is actually not just accepted, but is actually taught. So there are Muslim children who will learn about the jinn, and they will learn about their history and how they are. And that's one of the reasons that Turkey was brought into NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and it was brought into the economic control of America, because they wanted Turkey to be a bulwark, wanted it to be a buffer between a lot of these ideas that, frankly, would destabilize and leak up. And it allowed West to control the information coming through. So what I wanted to say about the jinn, I'm getting a bit of an
Yeah.
Yeah, Jess, it's your echo thing going on there.
Oh, okay. Well,
can you try muting your mic while Simon's speaking?
Does that help a little?
Yeah, I think.
Are we there?
Yep, that's happened.
Okay, so the idea is that jinn are controlled by an iron ring, and this is practiced by a lot of very high-ranking Freemasons, who would be properly called black magicians. And the teaching is that the iron ring allows you to control a jinn. This actually is not correct. Jinn absolutely detest humanity and do not like to serve humans. So they accept the exchange by saying, we're not serving the human, but we're serving the iron ring. The reality is that if you have the right bloodline, then the jinn have to serve you. Now, in the Muslim world, jinn are called forth by very long mantras, ancient conjuring routines, many scripts, and it does indeed bring them forward. But the point is that if you have the right bloodline, you can command these things anyway. And it's misunderstood that King Solomon didn't command the jinn with the ring. He commanded them because of his bloodline and who he was. But he wore the ring as a sop towards the jinn so that they would carry on serving him. And even in many magic circles, that actually isn't taught. These trainee magicians are taught that it is the iron ring that is vital, but it isn't. It's the bloodline. So that's something that not many people are aware of.
Well, that's interesting that you said that, because I tend to agree with you in many points. I don't feel that we should be trying to command anything. I've actually heard someone in a prayer trying to command angels and saying that they're supposed to listen to us. And I said, no, they don't have to listen to us at all. We can request and ask for help, but they're not required to listen to us in that respect, especially if we're disrespectful. So that's something to, consider as that level of respect. And also the repercussions of not having that respect could be, astronomical in a lot of ways in your personal life. And I've encountered quite a few people who had their lives were just in turmoil all the time, and they sort of had this haphazard kind of approach, not recognizing that these are powers. So I thought that you had kind of a firmer understanding about, that they are powerful beings as well, and your information could probably help so many people that, do paranormal investigations, that do, some of the magic practices. I think what you're saying is really, really crucial.
Well, thank you. What tends to happen is I recently finally gave in and got my own website up and running, and then I left Facebook because I'd had enough of Facebook. And I have a lot of requests from people who are afflicted by demons of one sort or another. Mm-hmm. And, I've had people not fly from all over the world. I think the furthest anybody flew to me was Canada. They flew from Canada with a person who had jinn possession, and I was able to get rid of that. So it's a subject that I'm very familiar with. It's a subject that I don't approve of, because there are unscrupulous people there who do deals with these interdimensional entities, to give them their correct terminology, and they use them to harm. You can, for instance, you can go into a bazaar or a market in Turkey with maybe $400, mm-hmm. and you can pay somebody to send a demon against your enemy, and the only question the magician will ask you is, have you been wronged by this person? And you just have to say yes. They've insulted my family, or they've wronged me in some way, and then you pay your $400 or $500 over, and then the magician will call forth the demon and send it to that person. And I've had a number of cases where there have been those instances. And then I spent a number of hours, removing these creatures. So it's very real, but to the Western world, it's something that they look like it's this really being interfered with. This. Can you hear me at all?
Yeah, we hear you fine, Simon. It's something that happens on Jessica's headset. I don't know what happens, but
I think it's traveling over the ocean, and something happens in between.
Yeah, there's a strange sort of feedback. But Simon, you were mid flow. Sorry,
I don't remember what I was saying now.
You were talking
about going into a marketplace in Turkey, and that all you have to do is just see if the person has been wronged, and they will agree to do something, and you've helped people.
Okay. Sorry, it's just a bit off-putting. So the thing is that in the Western world, it's something that is not publicised, it's not understood, it's not promoted, and there's no real serious discussion on it. The only way you know it is when people from other countries come here, and then they're talking quite openly. But of course, many of these other cultures keep themselves to themselves, and it's not a topic that the Western media want to give any credence to, because as soon as they start talking about them, then of course it opens the debate for other questions. So it was a fertile ground for me to open a discussion. I wanted people to talk about it. I also wanted to help people. There are so many people around the globe being affected, and there seem to be so few people who are prepared to, offer a hand of help. And so that's why I did the conference last year.
Well, this is a really big problem here in the U.S. It's a really big problem. If you look on Facebook, there are multiple sites where there are paranormal investigators, and they're all over the United States, all different states. I've done interviews with people from multiple states throughout the U.S. who are into paranormal investigations, and they're trying to figure it out. Some of it, they're working with Ouija boards. Are you familiar with Ouija boards?
Yeah, I certainly don't recommend that, because when you use a Ouija board, you open a portal between yourself and the interdimensional space, and then these creatures will often come through and then inhabit the body of one of the people using the Ouija board. And I have had 3 instances where I've removed demonic creatures from people. 2, I think, were taking ayahuasca, and at the moment they took the ayahuasca, then the creatures, when their natural defences are down, the creatures just entered them. And one person was a Ouija board where they'd opened a portal and it...
So, pulling demons off people after ayahuasca.
Yeah, ayahuasca is, I've had so many people come to me because my primary profession is that I'm a reader. I do Akashic record readings, and I do past life regressions. And so, on occasion, people say, well, I was thinking about taking a trip to Peru. And it got very fashionable during 2012 for people to take their, Mayan trip down to South America with a shaman that they don't really know that well, and allow themselves to fully open up through taking this hallucinogen, ayahuasca, and then, just odd things happening. And I would highly recommend it. I would ask people, please do not take it. You don't need that to interact with your higher self and increase your spirituality. But unfortunately, not all of them listened to me because it was very trendy. But if you can, I just want to help people because I have shared much of this information with people. It's nice to have someone of your stature to be able to share this information as well. So if you can explain what actually happens with ayahuasca.
Well, okay. Well, first of all, what I would say is not every organisation that offers the ayahuasca experience has been corrupted or infiltrated, but a number of them have. So a number of them actually are working hand in glove with some organisation, and it's just literally about taking people who are spiritual or people who are on the verge of becoming very spiritual, getting them all in one location, one room, and then literally these creatures just sit in the ceiling. They're just hanging in the ceiling. And when the people take the ayahuasca, as part of your natural defence, all human beings have a lesser or greater psychic defence, psychic barrier. And when you take ayahuasca, it does expand your understanding of time and space. But in doing so, you leave the third dimension. And when you leave the third dimension, you actually enter their realm. And as soon as you enter their realm, then it's a level playing field, because they are no longer having to operate in the third dimension. You have gone into their realm, that's their home turf, then they're in charge. So they then enter the human body, and that's what they try and do. Sometimes they'll try and stay there permanently, sometimes they'll use it as a portal and come and go. And often people will say that they notice someone's personality change. So on Monday or Tuesday, they were really aggressive and angry. And then on Wednesday they were completely different. There are many other signs as well. So I don't recommend it, simply because if you're going to connect with your DNA strands, which is what Ascension is all about, connecting with your higher self, taking ayahuasca actually does not help you. It gives you the impression that you are ascending or you're having these experiences. In reality, you're not actually connecting your DNA any faster. So I don't recommend ayahuasca. I recommend meditation. I really do. Meditation is much more effective at communing with either yourself or with benevolent energies.
Well, that's brilliant. And I'm in agreement with you 100%, and you really fully described exactly what I've already felt. So thank you so much for that. One of the arguments that they have is that the native people have been doing this for, hundreds, thousands of years. Whether it's the Native American who do peyote or the South Americans who do ayahuasca. And as I said before, I interact with people of all different backgrounds, Native people, Native Americans, as well as, people that are from Peru, Mayan, Aztec. I've interacted with a lot of different types of people, and I've had many different types of clients from different backgrounds that have come to me and deeply in search of, trying to figure things out. But their argument many times says, the Native people have been doing this for years. How could this harm us?
Okay, well, there's a very simple answer to that. Many indigenous peoples refer to demons as earth spirits. And many of these indigenous communities have agreements going back a very long time with these creatures. And the creatures don't tend to want the same from those bodies that they do from the westernized people. In other words, if you are a person who comes from a long bloodline that's had an agreement with these creatures, then the relationship is different. If you don't have that agreement, and somebody else is making an agreement on your behalf, then the creatures enter your body with a completely different agenda. And that's the point, that many of these native peoples do live side by side with these energies, but the relationship is totally different. These energies have a greater respect for these people simply because they are much more connected to the earth, the vibration of the earth, the understanding of the earth, and they don't have an axe to grind against them. Whereas with the Western world, a lot of these energies are interacted with by let's just call it a third power or a third source, and they are directed against people. That is why you can get a package holiday, go out and join the fun and have a ayahuasca evening, and there's 15 or 20 people, all very spiritual. The majority of them will come back very different, will not be so spiritual, will not be as awake, and will be afflicted and very bad. I've seen these people. I mean, some of them are totally destroyed, emotionally, psychologically. Some of them can't even hold a job down. Well, that's how bad it can be. So I have no problem in saying to people, really think twice about anything like that, unless you have a very strong native bloodline or family that allows you to partake of these things with some protection. I really wouldn't recommend it at all.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And so it's really, essentially, you're saying it's the agreements that you make with these beings. And so if the bloodline has to have that connection, otherwise you're tampering with something that could be volatile. Is that what you're saying?
Nearly. If you don't have a long association in a indigenous population with these creatures, then you are seen as an easy target. You are seen as no one's protecting you. You are seen as that's what you're there for. You're there to be taken over. Many of these creatures come through from the interdimensional space. They already have a brief. They've already been told, we are going to bring a number of humans to you tonight, and then just have some fun with them. And they'll also have targeted one or two individuals who might be very special, and they'll say, right, you must make sure that you get into this individual because we are going to be working with them at another level. So it's quite a sophisticated operation. I don't want the audience just to think that you turn up and these things just happen to wander through. That's not the case. It's planned, it's organised. That's not all of them. I did put this caveat on it. There are quite a few of these that are quite, decent and good, and they're not working with anybody. They're just offering a sort of a hallucinogenic experience. But there are a number of these organizations that are controlled, and ultimately some of them are controlled by the CIA. So, I would really counsel people to be very, very careful. And if you are going to do this, for heaven's sake, try and speak to people who've been with that same organisation and been there and had no ill effects. So that's the best I can say, really.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic advice. And, I think you bring in another perspective and information regarding it. Everything was created by Source. Everything was created in the universe. There is, a purpose for all things. They all have their domain. Is there a specific domain that these beings have, or what a purpose that you acknowledge and understand? Obviously, that they were not created to just be servants of human beings. I mean, as people have falsely misinterpreted.
Well, you just go back to the creation. Basically, as I know many religious people won't like what I'm going to say, but these creatures were on this planet before humans were. And this in lies the problem, because these creatures consider the earth theirs, and when humanity's numbers began to grow and human consciousness developed, human consciousness actually forced these creatures, because they're energy beings, they're not necessarily solid in the same way as we understand it. They are an energy force. Human consciousness, which is also an energy, basically forced these creatures out of the human realm. And as it forced them out of the third dimension, it did not have enough energy, this is human consciousness, to push them into the fourth dimension, because if you are a third dimensional creature, you cannot necessarily project your thoughts into the fourth dimension. But it was enough force to push them to the edge of the third dimension. And so these creatures were trapped in the space that existed was created between the third and the fourth dimension, and that's why I refer to them as interdimensional entities. So if you were to look at the space between the third and the fourth dimension, it would appear to us as an observer looking side on as about the thickness of a piece of paper. But in reality, because time and space just don't operate in the fourth dimension as they do in the third, you could get a whole city in there. So these creatures exist in an interdimensional space. They dislike humanity because they consider that humanity robbed them of their planet. So when Masonic or able black magicians call and connect with these creatures, or you get a Ouija board out and you've got a couple of people on the Ouija board who are quite psychic, that's enough energy to break through the third dimensional barrier and enter this interdimensional space, and these creatures will just say, oh, the door's been open, let's go through. So as soon as they go through, they find the source that's called them unintentionally, and they just go straight into that person's body. Now with a magician, it's usually a man, but not exclusively so, he is using the portal to bring them onto an altar, and then to commune with them and offer them something, and in return for that they'll do a job for him. So it may be that there's an individual that they want to control. So you can't do it with drugs. Maybe you put a demonic entity into them. That's very, very common. It's very common actually in families where a woman, mother, has children, and the children are very spiritual, and the elite want to get hold of those children. And in the Western world, I suppose it's the same everywhere, you control the children if you control the mother. So what they'll often do is put a demonic entity into the female, into the mother, and they'll try and then put a black magician her way, and in the hopes of manipulating the female so they can get at the children. It's a very nasty, dirty business. It's been going on for a long time, and sadly, the majority of the population don't actually understand what's happening. I wish they did, because then I think the public would actually suddenly realise that there's a lot of manipulation going on, and maybe then human consciousness would evolve even faster. But basically, the jinn are only following an agreement they've been made. And you're right, Jessica. Source creates all of these things. So if a person has a jinn in them, it's part of their learning as well. That seems very harsh, but it's a process that we go through, and then hopefully we can get rid of these jinn, but we learn from it and we become stronger. And ultimately, at the end of the day, humanity has got to expand, it's got to increase, it's got to share the world. It's much better if we can share the resources that we have rather than excluding people. And in the early days when humanity consciousness expanded and pushed these creatures out, I don't think there was any debate on the subject. Had there been a bit of a debate and an arrangement, some form of an agreement made, as has occurred with the native peoples, then the environment would be better. And that brings us full circle, because with indigenous native peoples who have made that agreement, they share the land, they share the third dimension with these creatures. That's why they're not attacked. But the modern humans, if I can use that term, in the Western world, never made that agreement. Therefore, it's seen as two groups: the humans who belong to the planet and are energetically connected to the planet as the jinn see it, and those group of humans who are not. That's very arbitrary, but that's the way they are. So that hopefully explains why we would have a situation where indigenous people don't report many problems, whereas those in a westernized society do.
Yeah, that does explain a lot, and I do believe that, and I agree with you 100% about, these beings. They were here. They've been here, and they have a right to be here, and Source created them, and so how do we be in peaceful alignment with them? What are the parameters that we must respect? I did a regression with a woman who came from Lemuria, and she had this experience, and she knew she was etheric. And she saw these beings show up, and I've actually seen them too. These are the jinn, or they sort of look like, without form, they sort of just have this dark coloring, about them, so that they more of a shadow effect.
Okay.
And I knew exactly what they were, and part of the reason why, and she said she saw herself lift up like she just didn't want to be with them because they were of a different consciousness. And then I realized that at that moment, as I was doing this regression with her, I recognized that we're doing this today. We are not open to other dimensional beings and extraterrestrials and so forth that have all been created by the universe. And so because of that, instead of evolving and helping us to evolve and understand, we're trying to exclude and trying to, just demand certain things that don't belong to us, per se. So it seems like this has been an ongoing thing for, our souls coming in different times throughout, the history of the universe, and whether it was Wolverine or Atlantean or in our present time now. I'm not sure if we've quite learned the lesson, and that's the big one, is how do we accept everything and understand that these beings all exist? And accept them and say that, they're here, they're created, and we can agree with them or disagree with them, but recognizing that are not going to go away just because we will them to go away.
Mm. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
And so, one other question along these lines, and then we'll switch the topic a bit, but I really, maybe, this is not so much an issue, maybe it is an issue. As you said, you decided to talk about it. Apparently there was a need. But it's an enormous issue for the U.S. because it's getting to be very trendy to do ghost hunting, to be a psychic. People don't fully understand what they're working with at times. And so how do you feel about people, ghost hunting, going into very haunted places and interacting or even irritating the spirits there?
I've never seen a ghost, but I've met people who I trust who have, so I fully accept, that is the case. I think that if a person is going there, then they have to ask themselves, why are they doing it? Now, if you're doing it because you are related to a member of the family who might be there, then that's legitimate, because you have a bloodline, you have a energetic connection. But if you're doing it because you're curious or because you're doing some research, then you're actually interfering in someone else's domain. It would be rather like somebody calling on your house and trying to sneak in through the back door and try and spy on you and put sort of electronic devices around to hear you when you walked around your home. It's also not to understand the situation that many of these disincarnate entities, these energy beings, actually face. Many times, psychic people have gone in to release these creatures who perhaps want to move on and can't. Other creatures don't want to move on and are quite happy where they are. So my advice is basically that if you are related to somebody that you think is in an energy form, call it a ghost, then I think that's acceptable, because you have a right to attempt a connection. But if it's just purely you're just interested and you're just curious and you want to have a look, well, that's not good, and you might end up with all your camera equipment fried or some very expensive electronics not working anymore. So it's probably best just to leave alone.
Yeah, and like I said, it's gotten to be extremely popular, and whether it's related to television shows and just people's fascination with the other dimension, I think a lot of it is trying to learn and to understand what's on the other dimensional side and how these, to see the effects of the paranormal. And it's pure curiosity, but it's a dangerous game. It's people, like when they're in their youthful days wanting to play with the Ouija board, it's the same thing. It's just a dangerous game, and anything can happen. I've heard of people being thrown, and hit and scratched and all that sort of thing. So, yeah, I mean, here again, great advice. If they have any encounter, and like I said, their lives are just like in turmoil afterwards, what do you recommend that they do?
Right, well, if they've got a possession that something's come into them, literally, then they need to speak to somebody who can advise them. There's obviously, I do that. There will be plenty of other people, I guess. I didn't expect to do it, but I can just say that my website's simonparks.org. If somebody has got something like that, then they can just email my web manager, and we can probably work something out. There are a number of people who can assist. If they've just had a freaky experience, well, what did you expect? A lot of people go to racing tracks to see a crash. That's why they like to go to stock car racing. They just want to see a crash. Well, if you go and see a ghost and it scares the bejesus out of you, that's what you got. That's what you expected. Does it actually help you to understand what you saw? No, it doesn't, because all you do is you go to the bar and you tell your friends you went into this old church or this old house and you saw something and the candlestick moved across the floor and you were really scared. It doesn't actually give you enlightenment. It doesn't actually develop your spirituality or give you any sort of insight into the lives of these creatures or what they may be experiencing or feeling. Some of them are in great pain. The humans don't actually understand that. So really, if they want to learn about it, then they should really go and join a proper spiritual group who seek to understand and not interfere. And we should have the respect for them as we would for anything else that's living. So, yeah, that's my words, really.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So, thank you so much for covering and explaining some of these topics. I think hopefully it will help a lot of people, and make sure that a lot of people get to hear what you just had to say. And we're going to switch the topic a little bit, and now, the counterpart of this is ufology, and people are equally fascinated with what's going on. I've had people on my show from MUFON who, they are UFO investigators, and they want to, just see if in fact that we're, being visited. And of course, in England, you're familiar with all the crop circles and all of this other type of activity. And so, there's also a fascination with this. Should people be careful from your perspective, should they come in with the right approach, and if so, what is the right approach?
Well, it's slightly different because people don't go and find these creatures generally. They come to the person. It's not like you have a location of an old haunted church or the headless monk who's been seen for the last 300 years, and you think, well, if I wait here, I'll spot him. These creatures choose the individuals that they come and visit, so you're either going to be visited by them or you're not. If you're visited, as I was as a child, you have a better chance of coping with it because you can learn to grow and live in two worlds, the world of the 3D matrix and this other world. If you are visited as an adult, then the problem is that you've already established what you believe to be the only world, the only reality, your own paradigm. So if you are in your 30s or your 40s and you suddenly meet one of these extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional creatures, then it's a heck of a shock, and many people cannot cope with it. So again, if you are in a situation where you have had these experiences and it's really upset you and you can't talk to anybody, then, please come to our website, send me an email, and, I will talk to you, and I will try and assist you and give you some positive ways that you can deal with it. Because I experience these creatures myself, that I'm not talking out of a textbook. I didn't go to a spiritual school. I haven't interviewed hundreds and hundreds of people to build up, a case study. I'm just talking to people based on the experiences that I personally have had. And so I'm trying to use those experiences to support other people and say, you're not on your own. Yes, I really can understand what you're talking about. And to give them examples so that they feel more secured, and they can understand, because understanding is more than half the battle. If you understand what's happening to you and why, then you're in a stronger position to be able to come to terms with it and go forward.
Now, when I was a child, thank you very much for that answer. When I was a child, I always felt different. I knew things were happening to me that were different. I was withdrawn. I was quiet. I had an experience where I'm getting some feedback or something. I had an experience where Hello?
Did we lose you? You had an experience. Yeah.
Okay. So, I had an experience where when I was younger, probably about 8 or 9 years old, maybe even younger than that, 7, I was playing in my front yard, Simon, and I could see that the air texture was almost looked like it had density, it almost looked like there were. It was sort of like not a sponge, but like a plastic, like with bubbles on the inside. Or a gelatin of some sort. And I kept on reaching forward to touch this substance in the air, and I remember, like, the kids in the neighborhood would say, well, what are you doing? I said, can't you see that? Can't you see all of this? And I knew that it's like I was seeing into the other dimensional space as a child. And I remember the kids looking at me like I was odd, and it happened a couple of times, and I mentioned it, and then I finally realized they're not seeing it. I need to be quiet because they're looking at me in a strange way. Is this how you felt growing up? Did you confide in anyone, or did you keep it to yourself?
Hey,
Simon?
We lost Simon.
Oh.
After all that. So where has he gone?
Yes. I knew there was something going on that was unusual.
Right. Okay. Now we're back on the air. And I thought I saw Simon sort of pick up there. They didn't. So we're still unable to connect with Simon on the Skype call. I don't know whether it's a British, because he's in England in the middle of the island. So I don't know what we're going to do here. I'll see what I can.
Okay.
Okay. I'm going to check my emails and see if he's sending any emails. Okay. So, but why don't you talk about what you've just been talking with Simon about? Your impressions.
Yeah. Well, I really think that the topics that we discussed earlier when I was speaking with Simon really helps people to understand more in depth of the reasons why you do not tamper with some of these different types of energies that are out there. If you don't understand something, it's not a good thing to just jump in and try to explore and investigate. As Simon mentioned, there are certain agreements, especially with the indigenous people. They have agreements through a bloodline. The bloodline seems to be the crucial aspect of what is the connecting force, because it links back to an agreement of respect, and it's something that's ancient, and it has value, not just to us but to the beings on the other side, and whether it's the jinn or whatever term that you may use for them. And so that part I thought was very enlightening. And the reason why a lot of people who try to go into the native culture, and even though in a past life they had this experience, they still may encounter some problems and some biological problems, having physical health issues, possessions, and some other uncomfortable situations, maybe loss of job, and it's just no one really wants those kind of tragic things happening. Of course, there are, exploring and understanding and living in these different places can bring in these questions. I know that I've done sweat lodges and the shaman or the medicine man who would conduct it, would have full conversations of, what he called the Wakins, and these are these spiritual beings that came down and they would communicate with them, and I would actually see him do like a rain ceremony, and it would start raining. It just, it's one of those things that you can't believe unless you see it. However, this is not for everyone. It really isn't. And you have to be careful. And like Simon said, he'd laid out the parameters for us. The issue of being connected by bloodline, the issue of being connected, having those agreements, and also having that level of respect and not to be tampering with this stuff. So, there's some other things that he brought up is that, it's really popular to be a paranormal investigator now. Just about every state has their own teams, and they go out and they investigate these haunted places. But I noticed that quite a few of them have a lot of personal issues and things, come back on them. And I know that shows like Ghost Hunters and Ghost Adventurers, and sometimes they antagonize the spirits a little bit. But, and then, it creates another type of problem. And so then there are people that go into cemeteries, they're going on all these different locations and trying to antagonize spirits, and then it creates another problem. It creates usually a problem for them and their relationships, their home life, and family. So, it's just something to consider. The whole thing about Ouija boards, is not just a board, it's not cardboard. It is the energy that you're putting into it, and the symbols probably, we didn't discuss that with Simon, but I'm just adding that information, the symbols and everything else that kind of joins people together in agreement and having some kind of psychic connection opening up these portals, which then invites these beings in. But of course, like I said, if you do not have the bloodline, you're not fully protected. And so really consider what you're doing in order to deal with these types of energy. And how do we usually, this is not to discuss the whole topic of being in fear. We don't have to live in fear. Fear is, an energy that prevents us from experiencing life. And so we need to enjoy our lives, embrace our lives, but recognize that there are other spiritual beings out there that exist, and they have a right to be here. They were here before the human race was, and so being in agreement with that. And as I mentioned earlier about, doing regressions and seeing people discussing, more than one, talking about an invasion of some of these beings that are coming in and in Lemuria, and seeing that they were kind of opposed to them because it was a different level of consciousness, and kind of wanting to exit instead of recognizing that these beings were there for a purpose, and they also can exist and do influence our experience to some degree. So that's just words to the wise. Another thing that Simon brought up that I thought was really extremely helpful as well was the whole point of using hallucinatory drugs such as ayahuasca and peyote, and I'm sure that there are others, probably some kinds of mushrooms or whatever. And, during the 60s, the LSD followers during the hippie movement kind of brought out the same thing, and people were thinking that it was bringing this incredible spirituality. They were opening up to, a higher sense of seeing into the other dimensional space, but it wasn't really raising in consciousness. So it really wasn't doing the appropriate thing and helping people to open up the right way. On the contrary, what it was doing is just creating a situation where a person could actually have multiple problems because they're opening up to these other dimensions, and they're not fully aware of how to get back on track and how to live their lives. And being disconnected, some people have referred to this as kind of losing a portion of their soul piece. And so, I've heard stories about people practicing ayahuasca and then saying that they went to do a soul piece retrieval because they're having so many problems, and that their part of their soul is still, in the rainforest somewhere, confused, lost. It's very a disheartening situation, but, people find a lot of this stuff exciting and interesting, but when they come to a practitioner such as myself, then, it's my job to help them retrieve and become whole. And you see what kind of damage has happened. So, even as Simon has offered to be available if people want to give him a call, and contact him through email on his website, Simon Parks. He can assist if there is a demon possession or if there's some issue that had happened through use of ayahuasca or some other type of hallucinogen. He can help in those areas, and that's incredibly important to always have a place where we can go when we need help. So the reason why you're not hearing Simon right now, I think we were disconnected. I don't know if Simon's back yet. Just want to check with JP.
Yes, indeed. So, Jess.
Hello. Hello. Are you there?
Ah, Simon.
Oh, yes.
Yay,
wonderful.
we're back. Okay.
Well, I think we had some sort of attack there because I think Jess said there was some feedback. That was the last thing I heard her say. And then it just went, huh.
Well, there we go. Now,
Yeah.
you were talking. Well, I did put a pin in it.
I know what we were talking about, so I can give Jumper back in.
Yeah, it was your question, Jess. You were talking about experience when you were a kid.
Yeah, when I was a child, Simon,
Yeah.
I was getting a lot of, I was stepping into the other dimensional space.
Okay.
I didn't know anything about it. No one in my family's psychic that I know of. And it was, something, I was very quiet compared to the 6 children. And I remember just, playing outside and actually looking, the air quality looked like it had substance. Like, in other words, it almost looked like a gelatin with bubbles. It's the only way I can describe it, because I remember reaching to try to touch it.
Okay.
And, I was like, well, why does it have that gelatin-like substance? And sometimes it was just like particles floating in the air that no one else was able to see except for me. And I started to feel like, why am I seeing this? And it would upset me because no one else was seeing it.
Yeah.
And that was one of the many things that I experienced, and I felt like I kind of withdrew a little bit and wasn't able to talk to others about it. And I just wanted to say that I imagine that you experienced something similar.
Yeah, I don't actually, because what you've got there is can I just go and get the phone? The phone's ringing. Hang on a minute. Phone, because it was annoying me, the ringing. I couldn't concentrate. The important thing about what Jessica's saying there is Jessica's actually seeing into another dimension. So the reason that nobody else could see the craft was probably because it was either in infrared or it was still in the 4th dimension or in the interdimensional space. So it hadn't any physical form for sort of an ordinary human eye in the visible light to see. But some people, and obviously Jessica is one of them, is capable of perceiving into another dimension, and that's why she was seeing it in the way she's described. I don't see very often into that dimension. I will only see the craft when they physically come into the 3rd dimension. The only time, and I actually got hold of some mineral, some moldavite, which was recommended to me, which did actually help. 2 examples.
What was it that helped?
Pardon?
What was it that helped you?
Moldavite. It's a mineral.
Oh, moldavite. Okay.
Moldavite, yeah. I'm sure everyone will know probably what moldavite is. It was from an asteroid which became a meteorite that crashed into the Earth, and it was unusual because the explosion mixed both the extraterrestrial rock and the Earth rock and threw it up, but not out of the atmosphere. So the gravity managed to pull it back. And as it fell back, it fused together like molten glass, so that both terrestrial rock and extraterrestrial rock fused together. And it's like obsidian, but it's green, and it's called moldavite. Mm-hmm. And it's understood to be a very powerful activator for people who have or think they have alien encounters. So anyway, I did try this, and I held it in my hand for about 20 minutes, and I did experience exactly what you're talking about. Now, you didn't need moldavite, my love, but I did. And the best way to describe it would be I would walk out the room, and then I'd reach my hand out for the door handle to open the door to go out, but find I was about 9 paces too early for the door. So my perception that I was at the door, I wasn't. And the other one I get now, I don't have that with the moldavite. If I'm walking downstairs and then suddenly one of the stairs appears to have gone. So when I look down, I see normal 3D stairs and then one missing, and there appears to be a massive drop going goodness knows where. And I know in my heart that there's really a step there, but I'm perceiving nothingness, and I actually jump and will physically jump the stair. Then I'll look back and it'll just be normal. So I get these glimpses of another dimension, but I can't control it. But what you've described to me is that.
Yeah, this has been a challenge all of my life because I really ran away from it. I didn't understand it, and I thought it was upsetting because I would have encounters with every type of being you can imagine, because I thought that they were coming into my space, but then I started to realize that I think I'm going into theirs, but I didn't know how, and I had no control over it. And I always felt like I was in some kind of gateway because I could see grays, I could see just about anything. And I wasn't really sure why I was seeing it. A lot of times they would just communicate with me. And it typically was pleasant. On a rare occasion, it would be nasty. But here again, it was just probably a mix-up in communication. They were probably wondering why I was in their space, and I had no idea how I got there. So I've been called a space shot, you're in two different worlds, or what do you're very good as a reader, but, sometimes my sense of direction is completely off. It's always off. And so I need a GPS to take me everywhere. So, it's things like that, people say, well, how come, you can read, and yet, I said, I'm bridge, I've learned to deal with kind of being in two different dimensions at the same time. Or whatever dimensions they are, but at least, the 3D and then something else. And, it's been a challenge. I've learned to control it, but I've also gotten into writing, and it enables me to kind of release some of the information. But, I always felt different as a kid, like kind of different, not in a good way. Like I wanted to not talk about some of this stuff. And it wasn't until later on in my adulthood that I started to come more forward about it. So, I imagine that you sort of, I applaud you for coming forward and talking about some of your experiences because people don't know how to understand it, but it seems like you handle it very well. I mean, you're able to talk about it and people respect you. So I just want to get your feedback on that.
Well, as I said earlier in the show, I've been around these creatures for a very long time as a small baby, as a small child. When you're very young, you don't know any different. Yes, I knew that they didn't look like my human mother, but the important thing is that they never hurt me. So I never associated anything bad with them. If you take a dog or a cat to the veterinary surgeon, the first time they may not be too bothered about it, but after they've had an injection or something, they always remember when they want to go back there, they're barking or scratching. So we learn as mammals from our experiences. So if a person has experiences which are benign and don't harm them or upset them, then they have no reason to be fearful. If someone has an experience which they interpret badly or is indeed bad for them, then of course then the human fear begins. But as a child and as an adult, with these experiences with these wide range of creatures, whether they be reptilian or mantis, I don't see the greys very much actually. My experiences have never led me to be fearful, so I'm just very fortunate because I appreciate many people do have bad experiences, and I can only speak for myself and my own experiences. And as a child, I soon learnt to not talk about it because it wasn't fashionable. People didn't want to hear about it. And then as I got older, I came to the conclusion that it was too big a subject, that I had a story to tell. My human mother, gave her life in a way because she worked for the National Security Agency, but obviously through MI5 in Britain. And so, there's a big history for me, and I felt the time was right to talk about it. I knew that many people would be dismissive or say that I was cuckoo or what have you, and I really don't care, because if I speak to 100 people and 10 of those people then go out and do their own research, then I've reached 10 people that I wouldn't have done otherwise. So for about 3 or 4 years, I got it in the neck from the established media. And then there was a real dramatic change when in Britain we have what we call the Ministry of Defence, which is the government department that oversees all the military in the country. And the Ministry of Defence invited me to have a tour of a secret space radar base here in Great Britain, which I accepted, and I got a 3-hour tour around the radar base. And this completely was a game changer, because all the media who had been trying to make a fool out of me suddenly started asking questions. Well, hang on a minute. This is the guy that's gone public that he sees reptilians and mantis. He's the guy that's gone public that his grandfather worked for the CIA and his mother worked for an NSA, yet he's been shown around a radar base. So maybe there's some truth in what this guy said. So literally overnight, the established media completely changed in its approach towards me. And since then, really, I've not looked back. So when something kicks off on the world, then the BBC ask me for a comment. And I often make the point that when the new Pope took office last year, and he said that he would baptise aliens, the BBC said to me the first person we wanted to comment from was you. So that's a big change from the days when they would just try to make me look crazy. So it is possible to go public. It is possible to walk a very fine tightrope between giving information which is helpful, but not giving so much information that elite bodies start to really take a hatred to you. I mean, I think about dear old Alex Collier, who was threatened with his life and disappeared off the scene for over 10 years and then came back again. There are some very genuine people like Alex who have tried to walk that tightrope. And, you've got to be very skilled to stay on that tightrope and not fall too much either side. And so far, I've just been quite lucky, really.
Right. No, I mean, you've really done a lot, and it's been extremely helpful. But I understand, how it feels to sort of like when you're a child, you don't want to, have these discussions. And then as you get older and you recognize that it does help people, and I wrote a book about some of my experiences called The Seer, Violets in the Grass. And it's, quite a few people have gotten back to me. I was surprised. A lot of them said, wow, I understand your story. It's almost like, it feels like it was my story.
Okay.
So there are people that, are intuitive or that understand the culture that I grew up in the U.S., understand some of the odd visions that I've had, and not all of them, but maybe recognize a few different things because I think they're common. They're a piece of our history, and so that as a soul group of the human race, that people recognize it. And I've talked about all different types of beings that I've seen, and one of them was I did talk about the Greys. And the Greys never came to me in a hostile way. They came to me that they were upset about what was happening to the Earth, and this is so contrary to what everyone else is saying. And what their thoughts and intentions are of the Greys coming here. But from my perspective, they didn't like that we were destroying the Earth, in its environment. And one of the interactions that I had with them is I remember looking at them and I saying, "Oh, you're an alien," and then they showed me like a quick, a really close up of my eyes and my eyelash, and how my eyelash was moving, like when your eyes are blinking.
Uh-huh.
And then they said, "Well, you're a bug." They said that to me, like in other words, your eyelashes look like a spider. And they didn't say it, but that's what their impression was. And so they were playing with me and reminding me that, from what my perspective of them, I was judging them, and then they judged me back, and then I got what they were saying. Like, in other words, once we got past that, then we could communicate in a way that they were expressing their concern. So that was my interaction with them. It's very unique. It's different from what other people have had in expression. So you said you haven't seen the Greys too much or interacted with them.
No, I've seen maybe I've had about 15 experiences over my lifetime, which is very small compared to the others. I've seen probably about 3 or 4 different species of Grey. The ones I don't particularly get on well with are the ones that Hollywood promote. There's the ones with the big wraparound eyes, the almond eyes, and the reason I don't get on with them is because generally they don't have a soul. I find it quite difficult being around animated bodies that don't contain a soul. So that's the only reason that it's a prejudice I have, I guess. Many of these robotic Greys don't need a soul.
Right.
I personally have a problem with that. That's where that comes from. But some of the greys I saw as a child were different. They had the very small eyes, and they did have a soul. So for me, that was okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, whichever ones I interacted with, they seemed to have a soul, and they seemed to want me to understand that they were not here for any bad purpose, and that they were kind of upset about the situation, or very upset about the situation of what we were doing to our Earth. So for me, that felt benevolent. And I've also seen mantis. There was a male mantis that even JP and I were interacting with during a regression that seemed to go back in early times, even biblical times, and seemed to be, a little bit. Personality seemed to be kind of challenging me a little bit, not in a negative way, but like playing with me, not giving me the correct answer. Evasive, maybe? That might be the right word. But not really negative, not hostile or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's about right, really. The mantis, I know you guys say mantis, and here in Britain we say mantid, but the mantis generally are keepers of, not secrets as such, but lore, and they're very, very cagey about giving out what they consider to be sensitive information. And so often when dealing with a human or a human-type creature, they will be a bit playful in a strange way and be guarded. One of the main reasons for this is because often when a person interacts with an alien creature, the human military then try and pick that individual up and then find out what's been going on. And it's not unknown for a human to be chipped, and then when an alien comes and takes them either physically or in their energetic body, then the military will attempt to follow that person, and certainly when they return back to the Earth, then they will try and abduct that person and extract from them what they might have seen or might have heard. So a lot of aliens are incredibly cautious about what they say or do with a person, and they go to great pains to try and wipe their mind, so that if the Earth military do pick them up, then they can't really tell them very much. So it's quite a game of cat and mouse going on, and have done for the last 50, 60 years. Yeah, and well,
like I said, that there's one thing to see them and to have people, draw pictures or whatever. I've not had, well, I take that back. I have had some odd memories. Some of them were not positive. But it was not from this lifetime. But for the most part, when I interacted with the mantis or the mantid, it definitely felt like it was a male, and it felt like exactly like you said, a little cagey, a little evasive. But I found he was endearing. In some way, I definitely liked him, and didn't feel like he was, here again, not as threatening and scary as some people interpret. My experiences with a lot of these beings have been interesting in certain characteristics and attributes that, for the most part, they exist, we all have our space, we all have a purpose, and at some points our experiences collide.
Yeah. It's funny, because one person who was quite happy to call herself an abductee said to me that what upset her most was that these creatures never spoke to her during an abduction. And she said to me, why don't they speak to me? Why don't they communicate to me? And I said to her, because they don't bother, because you're not supposed to remember. Because they wipe your mind end of the program, and therefore they don't bother talking to you because you won't remember. But in her case, it didn't take 100%. So she had these partial memories of interaction with these creatures. And the big thing for her was that they never spoke to her. So I said, well, look, next time you're there, ask them if you can remember some of it, because you'd like to have a conversation with them. And I know that sounds really crazy for people, but when people are very scared, they get into a sort of a victimization role. And the best thing to do is to equalize your space by starting a conversation with them and actually saying, I would like to remember this. This is my body. It's my memory. I have a right to remember. So, okay, you may not let me remember all of this, but would you let me remember part of it? And that's very empowering, because that has worked for many people where they've had bits of this they can remember. So they know that they're not going mad, that they really did have an experience. And it's about taking your power back. It's about, put it this way to you, the best way, in 1965, I was about 5 or 6 years old, and I was in the front room of the apartment that I lived in with my human mother, and a creature visited me, and as part of the conversation, it communicated to me, we are all equal, you should never be scared of us. And that stuck with me right through. We are all equal, you should never be scared of us. So that's an alien telling me that we're all equal, don't be frightened of us. And that's so empowering.
Yeah,
and I just wish that they would say that to everybody, or everybody would remember it if they said it to them.
Yeah, we're on.
Yep. Yeah, so I just wish that would, and people would be for.
Have we lost you, Jess? Let me just call it. Oh, right. Yeah, of course. Where were we? What were we talking about just then?
We were talking, and he was sharing a story about, people's experiences of trying to recall and remember.
Oh, yes, we're all equal, that's right.
Yeah, having recall, and having an intention and asking to recall when they're going through these experiences, so that they realize that just because there isn't any conversation, that maybe if they had the conversation, they wouldn't find themselves to be a victim in the situation.
Yes. So that's a very empowering thing. Well, we seem to have lots of little breaks where we can, catch up and kind of recapitulate on what he was talking about. It's quite an interesting process.
I mean, it's amazing stuff. I mean, I could just talk for hours about this stuff, and it's nice to interact with someone who's like-minded, because he knew exactly what I was talking about, is that caginess and the evasiveness of the mantids.
Yes, this, and it's funny because on the show the other day we were talking about sense of humour, that it's about the mantids and the reptilians have no sense of humour.
Well, I think it's my interpretation that I thought it was comical that he was going back and forth about when I asked him a question and fluctuating, and so and maybe they don't interpret that as being a sense of humor, but that's our interpretation, and that I found it kind of comical or endearing, and then he said, it's mostly because they don't like to be captured and they don't want to have any adverse effects, and they try to keep their information private.
All right.
So, so I guess the comedy part of it, it's different. We are back.
Yep.
Answers from the Universe. And we had lost Simon again. Something going on with the connection. I don't know what it is, but that's fine. I always felt like the universe understands all of this, and there's information there to be shared with everyone. Maybe some of these beings don't like being talked about. They kind of coexist with us. They're here in this other dimensional space. We talked about the event that's coming up in Massachusetts. Actually, it's going to be in Hampton Beach, New Hampshire on April 25th, and if a person wants to contact me, I'm going to be posting a lot of that information on Facebook. But I just feel a little compelled to talk about my book, The Seer, Violets in the Grass. where I talk a lot about these things. It starts off with my childhood, the other dimensional space that I started stepping into, having interactions with beings in what I would acknowledge as my parents' bedroom, but the beds were gone, and here's these beings that would show up and start communicating with me and telling me about the future. I had incidences of a woman that shows up while I was in a den of my house, listening to music. And as I'm listening to the music, a woman walks in that I'd never seen before. She leaves the house, or she walks away because I wouldn't touch her hand. I was afraid to touch her hand and wasn't sure why. I remember her eyes being a little bit on the wild side, and I was just intimidated by her, and her energy wasn't right. And when I had a discussion with my mother about her, she didn't know what I was talking about. So never heard the woman leave through the door, just sort of disappeared. I can't explain a lot of this stuff. I was trying for years to try to figure out what exactly was happening to me. And I always thought that these things were coming into my space, and as I'm becoming more knowledgeable in these areas, I'm realizing that I was going into their space. So that then brought up the question of, what is my purpose for doing this? Why am I doing this? And finding that a lot of who I'm interacting with on the other side seem to be peaceful, seem to be kind, seem to have a higher purpose, seem to have a higher consciousness. Even the ones that challenge me, I recognize that they're territorial, they have their space, they're allotted that space, and I've learned quite a bit. It also helps me to help others. But for those that are curious, I mean, there are a lot of pieces of information that I talk about in the book, and even though I call it like a fictional book, it's it is sort of a biography. I call it a fictional book because people wouldn't understand it and wouldn't comprehend fully. But it does, address a lot of different issues. And when I was really young, Simon touched on the topic of robots, or, the Greys being, some of the Greys are just robots. And I remember at a very young age being frightened and saying, the robots are coming. The robots are coming, and crying every night. It went on for a period of time where I just felt very, very frightened. But I think it was the coldness and the lack of communication or soul that kind of made that feeling accentuated and intimidating. So a lot of these things that were one of the reasons why I was all excited when I saw Simon is because I saw that there would be something in common that we had, and that was growing up, having these encounters, not understanding how to interact with people about it, and then, finding ourselves kind of doing this work and helping people to explain, almost like being, whether it's a liaison or an interpreter, or an advocate for other dimensional beings. I'm not really sure what the role is. All I know is that we can, bridge that information. So, and we're hoping that we can still reconnect with Simon before the end of the show. We have, a little more than 15 minutes or maybe around that point. So, I'm just going to keep on sharing about it.
We're just going to have him back. Just going to have him back, eh?
Yeah, I would love to have him back because I have so many questions to ask him about. He even is very knowledgeable about the Montauk Project, the Illuminati, and I know that, JP, you talked to him about the Montauk Project.
Simon, I don't know if I spoke to Simon about the Montauk Project. I spoke to Stuart Swerdlow about the Montauk Project.
Oh, okay. Can you talk to him about the Mars group?
Yeah, we talked
you mentioned it in passing?
Yes. And because he'd spoken to Captain K and the other guy and Alfred Weber. But what he did speak to me about was this original, the landing party, as it were. That there was a 12th dimensional ship, the origins of humans on Earth, where there was a 12th dimensional ship, which basically crash landed on Earth, and there was a time compression between it and the immediate environment that it was in, and that it was incredibly traumatic for the people aboard, and not many of them survived, and those that did ended up as kind of dumbed. They kind of regressed. They stopped evolving, and that was what the reptilians found here, and that's what they then genetically modified. They probably thought, oh well, these are broken people. Let's just mess about with them.
Oh, so they came into our past or present or future? When did
they crash landed a long time ago? Long time ago.
Oh, a long time ago. So there was a humanoid race here that was brought in.
Yeah, that accidentally crash landed here, basically.
Okay. Well, we don't really know who they are, and if historically, if there was, any of the ancient cultures talked about those group of people. Was there any connection of who they were connected to?
No, but there was identified as. There was and I've yet to find it, but there was a Project Camelot interview with a woman who described exactly this situation, that she was one of the people on the ship, or she remembers being on the ship. So, and that was quite a while ago. I'm going to have to dig out, and actually probably have to ask Kerry. Do you remember that one? And see what we can do. Now, we still don't seem to have Simon online. He's just completely offline, so I don't know what has happened to him. I'm going to presume that the usual, they didn't want him to speak. So whatever.
No, maybe we touched on some topics that he wasn't supposed to talk about. I don't know, or it's just the typical. We get disconnected sometimes during this time of day. There's a lot of activity, and a lot of people are connecting on Skype and other mediums of phone, things like this happen.
Yes, indeed.
So, but I'm really hoping that we can have another call. Hoping that he shows up before the end of the show, but not. And then even more so come on as a guest again to cover some of the other topics. But that could be a good reason for me to, bring him in again, because I think he's fascinating, and I'm sure from the looks of all of his YouTube videos, other people think so as well.
Oh,
he's
yes.
brought a lot to light.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I love the fact that he's very matter-of-fact about stuff, and he's not he's not trying to scare anybody. He's doing exactly the opposite. He's like giving everybody enough information to be reassured.
Mhm. Yeah, and he's intelligent. He's very, very sensible about the way that he describes things. He didn't just talk and mention Moldavite in passing. He took the time to explain why it has value, how it helps people. That's a very, very thorough person. He covers all of his information, covers his tracks, and describes things well, so that you don't feel lost in the conversation. You're able to grasp and absorb some of the added information that he infuses, because it's really about understanding and learning, isn't it?
Yeah, well, we're here to learn stuff, and we've forgotten. That's our problem. Is we keep getting flashed, and we keep forgetting what we're supposed to remember, and what we're supposed to remember is what we're supposed to be doing, which is why we aren't doing what we're supposed to be doing. We get distracted easily. But the cards are stacked against us. We get distracted because we've been made to be distractible.
Yeah. But that's okay. I think eventually we get to those things. We say thank you very much for listening in. So sorry for any disruption to the show, but, we enjoy you listening and appreciate you and trying our best to provide you the answers from the universe. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you next week.